I'm Allie Evans. I am the Marketing and Business Development Director for Emerge Pediatric Therapy. We are so happy you're here today. Megan is going to present a fabulous webinar on debunking some myths on bilingualism and as it relates to speech therapy. But we're going to wait a couple minutes just to kind of let people trickle in. So I just wanted to say hi, hello, happy you are here.
Hi, everyone.
And we'll be back in a couple minutes. Thank you guys so much for being here. I know, Megan, you have a lot of info to share. And so I'm going to go ahead and get us started.
Yep.
Um, but welcome to our October webinar. Again, I'm Allie Evans. I'm the Director of Marketing and Business Development for Emerge Pediatric Therapy, and have had the pleasure of moderating these webinars all year. And we've had some really interesting topics, and our team has worked so hard to put this information out there. So if this is your first webinar, thank you for being here. If this is a return opportunity for you, thank you for coming back. All of our webinars are actually available to watch and enjoy on our YouTube channel. So if you go to YouTube and search Emerge Pediatric Therapy, our whole webinar lineup from the whole year is there. So I am super excited about this month. Very grateful to Megan for lending her expertise. And so I am going to go ahead and give you the floor. I think we've got some sponsor info because we do have some really great sponsors that have helped make this webinar series possible this year. So the first one is our friends at Carey Estate Planning. They are a planning law firm in North Carolina, and they actually approached us last year about wanting to partner on a project. They didn't quite know what that would be. We didn't either. But as soon as we told them our plan that we wanted to offer free educational opportunities for people, they could not have jumped on board faster. So they're just a really great organization in North Carolina. They work on family planning and creation of wills and estate planning. And it's not the easiest thing to talk about. So having someone that makes you feel safe and supported and heard is really important. So we highly recommend Carey Estate Planning, and we're very grateful for their partnership. And then our other sponsor is Ashley Brackett. She is a real estate agent in North Carolina in the Triangle area, grew up here. She and her husband are raising their son here. She loves all things local, and lucky for us, that applies to us too. So Ashley was very excited about providing the opportunity for local families to learn more about what we do and learn more about what resources are out there. So if you have any curiosity towards the real estate market in our area, you want to buy, sell, or just learn more about what's going on, Ashley is a super reliable, great person to reach out to. And we've had a couple people come to our webinars and just tell our sponsors thank you for making them possible. So if you want to do that, you're more than welcome to. That's my whole spiel, and I'm going to hand it back over to the expert and go on mute.
Sounds good. Thanks, Allie.
Thanks,
So,
Megan.
of course, thank you all so much for taking the time to join us on this webinar on bilingualism. We're going to be discussing so many things today, but before we get into the meat and potatoes of it, I wanted to take some time to introduce myself. So, my name is Megan Church. I'm a speech language pathologist and second generation Cuban American, so have that little personal connection to the bilingualism topic in which we will be discussing today. I was born and raised in Miami, Florida, and I'm currently living in the beautiful mountains of Western North Carolina, Asheville. I went to the University of Florida, go Gators, and got my graduate degree from Teachers College at Columbia University. I've been a practicing SLP since 2019 and with Emerge for 5 years now. Just celebrated my 5-year anniversary last month and wouldn't have it any other way. Emerge is a great organization to work with, and their mission statement just really aligns with my values as a therapist and a person. So super grateful for this opportunity. So beyond the bilingualism, which of course is why we're here, I have some particular interest in learning about sensory-based therapy, play-based therapy, neurodiversity, reading intervention, and early intervention as well. So we have my cute little family here in the bottom. We spend a lot of time exploring our new home. We've been out here not too long, so we're usually just out and about, hanging out with some new community members that we're getting connected with, and I try to read on my free time to decompress, which is wonderful. So if anyone would like to take some opportunities in the chat, share a little bit about what brings you to here? What brings you to here? What brings you to us here? Are you a teacher? Are you a therapist, a parent? And that way we can learn a little bit more about the community that we have here together and make sure that we are sharing the information that's really pertinent to you and your interest on the topic. So, Allie, if you could just monitor the chat and let me know if there's any questions along the way, feel free to shoot them out at any time. You don't need to wait till the end of the presentation, of course, although there will be time for that as well.
Yeah,
So let's
definitely introduce yourself. I'll keep an eye. And then if you have questions that pop up too, feel free to go ahead and put them in the chat. I think, Megan, you'll have time at the end too, if anything pops into your mind. But I'm happy to raise my hand and interrupt Megan to get your questions answered.
Beautiful. Thanks so much. All right, so let's get into it. So, we have a pretty beefy list of topics that I'd love to run through with you all today, starting off with just some more basic information about what is multilingualism, bilingualism, the facts and figures, stages of language acquisition, some neuroplasticity that is in play with this, which we'll talk more about, difference versus disorder, myths, misconceptions, common questions I receive from parents and how I answer them with research-based evidence, clinical implications for providing services with bilingual families and their kiddos, some therapy approaches that work, and then of course time for a Q&A at the end. So let's get into it. What is multilingualism? So, at its core, multilingualism is exactly what it sounds like. It's your ability to communicate in more than one language. So, someone who is bilingual speaks two, multilingual is more than two. And there are two primary types of bilingualism that are important to know about. Simultaneous bilingualism means that you learn two languages at the same time. And this is most common with our very young kiddos, ages like newborn, infant, all the way to about 3 years old. And this is most commonly occurring in multicultural families in which the kiddo will be exposed to more than one language at home. A sequential bilingual person is a little bit different, and they're someone who establishes that first language and then later in life tries to pick up a second. And it's that sequence of learning. And this is going to be most often thought of as like your classic language education that you might receive in elementary, high school, college, what have you. But neither is better than the other. It's just a different way in which you're acquiring this additional language to your repertoire. So development can vary greatly depending on what context you're in, your exposure, what environment and communities that you surround yourself with. But multilingualism is expected worldwide. I'd say that the United States is kind of like in the minority in that we don't have as many multilingual people here. But if you look at things on a global scale, the numbers are pretty impressive with how many people are multilingual. So let's think a little bit more about that. So there are many benefits that come with being multilingual or bilingual. So the three primary areas are cognitive, social, cultural, and academic, with of course plenty of career benefits that everyone talks about on LinkedIn. But those cognitive benefits, research has indicated that you actually have greater ability to utilize your working memory or short-term memory and better problem-solving skills. You can focus better and multitask because you have so much practice bouncing between language systems, and the skills that you have in one language transfer to the other. So lots of just basic cognitive benefits. From that social and cultural perspective, it really comes into play in keeping those family and cultural ties tight. And I can definitely attest to this as a Cuban American growing up in Miami, Florida. That language keeps you so deeply connected to your roots, and it's so important. So that's definitely very, very prevalent in these bilingual communities. You often will see increased empathy and cultural understanding because you have a wider worldview, greater understanding of differences and people that come from different backgrounds with different customs, and you're better able to communicate with people from all walks of life and have deeper and more diverse social connections, which is always definitely a benefit. Academically, because of some of those cognitive benefits we just discussed, you have greater mental flexibility and adaptability because of this practice bouncing between these two language systems. So, academically, research has indicated that you will see bilingual kids actually perform better on things like reading comprehension because they have a stronger grasp of linguistic concepts, period, and they're able to manipulate and adapt those skills in all kinds of areas academically. So it's pretty cool to see how vast and how wide of a net we can cast with regards to the benefits of being multilingual. So, looking at that global data that I referenced earlier, a whopping 60% of people worldwide speak two or more languages, which I think is like a wild number. That's a lot of people. We have 43% that are bilingual fluently, 17 speak three or more languages, and multilingual people are often called polyglots. And then in the minority, monolingual people who only speak one language come in at about 40%. So it's just really interesting to see that global scale, the impact of multilingualism, and the importance and prevalence that it has in our community. So, thinking about those facts and figures and kind of tucking them to the side, I think it's also important that we think about how do we acquire language? What are the steps? Because it's not just as simple as my abuela talks to me in Spanish and I pick it up. It's actually pretty sequential in how we learn and keep this language system. So, the first stage is pre production, and this is often referred to as a silent period. So, as you're being exposed to a new language, you're not really able to communicate yourself. You're just absorbing it like a sponge, and you're just taking in all of this linguistic information in your environment. And people estimate that this pre production period will last anywhere between like 6 weeks to 8 weeks, around that time frame. But of course, everything's a range. From pre production, then you start easing your way into early production, where you're gaining more competence and confidence in using short words, sentences. You're still making quite a few errors in that new language that you're working on acquiring, but you're kind of putting yourself out there and working on that expressive piece and still absorbing so much of what's happening around you. Then you turn into that speech emergent phase in which you're expanding your utterances, longer words, longer sentences, and strings of thought, although you still rely quite heavily on context clues and really leaning into topics that are familiar to feel comfortable in having that communication exchange in your new language. Moving forward, you kind of start getting more competence in social situations, and you can kind of work a little bit more on the fly as someone who is beginning fluency stage. And you still grapple a little bit with problem solving and getting stuck with some new context and maybe more advanced specific vocabulary, but you're still working on bridging these gaps in vocabulary despite being able to really start having that nice engagement with others using that new language. And from there, you continue to gain fluency and confidence in intermediate fluency phase. You're closing those gaps more and more. You have a few errors, but usually they're more like culturally dependent, like any like turns of phrases, idioms, figurative language that may not be familiar to you. You might use incorrectly now and then with the occasional grammar error, but you're fairly fluent and you're feeling really good. And then, of course, finally, that advanced fluency is the last stage of language acquisition in which you're fluent in all contexts, professionally, personally, socially, new context, old context, familiar, unfamiliar, and you can really just navigate as if you were a native. So those are the 6 stages of language acquisition and how our brain really builds up the skill and holds on to it. All right, so something that is crucial to understand when really thinking about language acquisition and bilingualism is this principle called use it or lose it. And it sounds like exactly what it means. If you don't use a skill, you lose a skill. So thinking about our brain chemistry and how our brain connects these new skills and maintains them, it's kind of like I equate it often to like building a road. You got to build a road one brick at a time. And if you don't have enough bricks, your road's not going to work. You're going to have too many potholes for it to be useful. And you're probably going to stop driving on it, and then it'll just kind of deteriorate away. So, skills and knowledge in language learning must be actively used through speaking, listening, reading, writing in order to be retained on a long term basis. So, those neural connections are crucial in learning the new skill, honing it, and keeping it. So we want this information to remain really strong and present for information recall. We can't really remember things if we don't use it very often, even if we used to know it. And being an active learner and having that active knowledge is going to be really important for progressing through those 6 stages of language acquisition because memorization is just not enough. You really need to use it and work with the grammar systems, the vocabulary, the different contexts, and those turns of phrases to really feel like you have that mastery and it's something that you've used and you've locked into your long-term memory. All right. So now that we have kind of those like fundamental language learning concepts reviewed, something that's going to be particularly important to this webinar specific to speech therapy and when to seek out support and how to provide support is knowing the difference between a language difference versus a language disorder. They are not the same. And a language difference is just some sort of variation in how you communicate your spoken language. And this can be due to like where you're from, what social community you're in, cultural factors. So, easy examples of a language difference is dialect. In Western North Carolina, you'll often hear people use an Appalachian dialect that is very new to me, being born and raised in Miami, Florida, and having lived in the Raleigh-Durham area before. So I've had to learn this new vocabulary to help myself navigate here more comfortably and confidently. But it's just a difference. It's not a disorder. It's just, unique to this area. Something that also falls within the language difference realm of things is code switching. Code switching is when you alternate between two or more languages, or you swap in between dialects or styles of speech in a single conversation. So, in the next couple slides, I have some examples of what those look like specific to code switching. Because people will often think of code switching like a classic example being like Spanglish. Like if I was like, hey, Ali, ¿cómo estás? Code switching because I'm swapping those languages, but it also can extend to that tone shift from formal to informal, or even that dialectal shift from more like standard American English to Spanish influenced English or what have you. So we can see some of those visuals here in a sec. Very differently from those topics we just discussed is that language disorder concept. So, a language disorder means that there is some kind of impairment in a language skill that affects your comprehension and your production across modalities. That across modalities is the most important part here. A language disorder must extend to all language systems that a person has. If I as a bilingual person, English and Spanish speaker, if my deficits are only present in Spanish, it's not a disorder. It must be present in English and Spanish for it to be considered a disorder. If I only have a deficit or a gap in a skill in one area, it's probably just because I'm still learning and I'm still developing that skill. And that across modality, I think, is especially important to note too, because it's not just spoken language, but it's also gestural communication like American Sign Language, communication devices such as those like tablets and devices with the apps that you'll see. All of those kinds of like hands-on modalities also are included in this category. So if I were able to use ASL and speak English, I'm considered to be bilingual because I have two different language systems that I navigate with. So this is a great example of code switching with regards to dialect as well as like tone shift. So on the left side, you see two peers communicating. It looks like it's like a very casual environment. And the person in the maroon shirt says, I don't got no pencil, but you might could give me yours. So that grammar system at first, if it's not familiar to you, may feel like, well, that's just incorrect grammar. Well, it's not necessarily true. It could just be a dialect that's unique to this cartoon character's background, which I am unaware of what this cartoon character's background is, but we can assume that it's just a dialectal difference, and that's why it's not considered a disorder that would need to be treated with like specific like ELA instruction, English language arts instruction. On the other side, we can see how this same maroon shirt character has shifted their tone and now they've changed the way they present that same message. I told him I didn't have a pencil, then I asked if I could borrow his. And the implication here is that it looks like they're in a classroom. Academic language is expected to be a little bit more on the formal side. So that character has code switched, changing how they speak depending on who they're speaking with and what environment they're in. And then, similar to my Ali example, this is Spanglish, no sé how, pero like, ¿estás ready? And it's just more traditionally combining two different languages into one statement or sentence or conversation. All right, so we're gonna jump into the myths now, featuring my super cutie patootie son, who has the greatest facial expressions of all time. So he's gonna be our poster child as we navigate through our myths and really work on debunking them. So myth number one that is extremely common and pervasive in my therapy room is that learning more than one language can confuse children. Theo with a very confused face. And we want to very loudly from the rooftops shout that that is not the case. So, what the facts are is that children's brains are literally wired to be able to acquire as many languages as they would be exposed to. And that kind of goes back to that use it or lose it principle. As long as they're getting the exposure, they will learn the language. It's not a confusion thing. That is like full myth, and research has time and again debunked that. Code switching is also not a sign of confusion. In fact, it's actually quite a sophisticated behavior that demonstrates someone's ability to be able to really mix and meld those different language systems into one. And actually, we really want to encourage that code switching because it allows really, really great practice for understanding how to use different grammar markers and vocabularies in the different language systems. And the more you practice with code switching, it really helps you tease apart those two languages and then eventually be able to use them independent of each other. We have a lot of cognitive advantages that we discussed in those benefits of multilingualism, like better problem solving, flexibility, executive functioning, and it's just normal language development. So, normal language development for a bilingual kid might look just a tiny bit different than a monolingual child, a single language speaker, but research has shown that they still end up meeting all their milestones within the same time frames. So, it's not a confusion thing, it's just development is just a tiny bit different. All right, here is myth number two. Multilingualism causes speech or language delays. Mhm. We have a gold face. Okay, so what are the facts? So, in normal development of bilingual children, you develop at the same pace as their monolingual peers. So, milestones are hit the same time frame, just like with the confusion piece, the same thing here. Even if there's a slight gap, and when those words start flowing or when those sentences start forming with a bilingual child, that's expected because they're learning two different language systems. So because they're learning more, there's just a slight, like, I guess, duration of time in which it might appear like, "Ooh, my kid's not learning words fast enough. Like, oh my gosh, like I need to stop that second language. They're getting confused." That's not going to cause a delay. They're just processing more. So they just need more processing time, and that's okay. Similarly, we want to think about vocabulary. So when you think about the pediatrician's appointments where they're like, how many words does your child have? And they're bilingual, you want to give them the total vocabulary of all languages. So water and awa are two different ticks in that vocabulary box. It's not just one because they're talking about the same thing. Two words, two different languages, each count as their own indistinct, like distinct vocabulary word. So oftentimes with that in mind, considering a total vocabulary approach, bilingual kids often will have same or greater vocabularies than their monolingual counterparts. So again, that's just a difference. It's not a delay. So speech and language delays were going to occur whether the child was bilingual or not. That extra language is not the thing that determines whether a delay or disorder is going to be present. It just means that their learning system and how their brain's processing things is just a little bit different because they're tackling different information. And there are so many benefits to bilingualism too that it can really strengthen language skills long term, like we were talking about before. So if it's meant to strengthen and we have all this evidence supporting the benefits, I think that really helps us understand why this myth is truly debunked. It's not going to cause a speech or language delay. It's actually going to enhance our language abilities long term. Myth number three, you should learn one language first and then the other. So thinking like we don't want to do simultaneous bilingualism. We want to do that sequential frame. One first, then the other to avoid confusion. You see there's like that underlying theme, fear of confusion and delay under all of these myths. So the facts here is that, again, our brain is truly wired to handle learning multiple languages simultaneously without any confusion. It happens at a global scale ever since the dawn of time and ever since people have started traveling and experiencing new cultures and languages. people have been exposing themselves to other languages and learning things at the same time. There's no correct way to acquire an additional language. Everything is a little bit context dependent, and it really depends on what makes most sense for you and your community, your family, your cultural ties, what's important to you. All of that plays a part in deciding how you want to address becoming bilingual or multilingual, even. So, actually, because we want to keep that use it or lose it in our head, as kids are born, their brain has like every roadmap possible for every language under the sun that they could learn as long as they have enough experience, exposure, and practice. So, if that means your family speaks 4 languages, sure, their brain's equipped for it. Let's go for it. You don't need to do English first, then Spanish, then Haitian, then Hindi. Like you can really just expose them to all, and their brain is wired to be able to absorb this information and start building that vocabulary and making those connections between same terms across different languages. The brain's amazing, and so are kids. All right. Myth number 4 we have is children must use both languages equally to be considered bilingual. So arms up, one for each language. I was trying to find him doing this, but he can't do that yet. So uneven fluency is exceptionally normal. In fact, it is expected for you to be dominant in one language over the other. The term used to describe someone who is equally fluent in 2 different languages is they are referred to as balanced bilinguals. And they're not impossible, but they're kind of like unicorns. Because think about the amount of exposure and repetition that you need to have to be dominant in something. To have equal opportunities in 2 or more languages is kind of a tall order for most people. So unequal fluency is expected, and kind of leaning again into that code switching concept. Code switching is also expected. It's a normal pattern of speech and way to communicate for multilingual people. The goal is ultimately communication. So, however, you're able to get yourself understood and to get your thoughts, ideas, needs, wants met, you're communicating. So, as long as we're doing that in a way that's effective and efficient for you, then that's great. So, you don't have to be equally bilingual in both languages to be considered like a bilingual person. And like we continue to go back to, we have that cognitive capacity and space to navigate multiple language systems. So that also is another reason why this myth is debunked. And yeah, so all of that fluency and that balance of which language is stronger than the other is just at the end of the day, all dependent upon exposure and practice. All right, and this is our last myth for today. A child with a language disorder should use one language. And Theo says, huh? What? That is not true, Mama. So there is no harmful effect of having more than one language in your home, in your community. In fact, it's just a benefit, like we've said time and time again. It's enhancing your skills cognitively, academically, socially. It improves your cultural competence and understanding and empathy. It helps you connect with people that maybe wouldn't have opportunities to connect with otherwise. It's not a disorder. It's just often viewed as a difference in a bilingual person because of those changes in grammar, tone, dialectal differences. All of that is just difference. It's not disorder. But it is possible to be bilingual with a disorder. So we're going to be getting into a little bit more now about how can I tell and how can I understand when I need support and when it's a disorder and not that difference that we've really been pushing so far. So what we want to watch for is always looking for presence and difficulty in all our languages and all of those different modalities. If it's present in both languages, then we really want to think about getting a proper evaluation, ideally from a bilingual speech therapist in that language that you are communicating with that's a non-English language. Especially if they're a late talker, because we do have that silent period, like we were talking about in our language acquisition slide. However, there is a point where we're not just silent period and we're actually just having difficulty processing language at large. So, what comes next is often the questions. When I start noticing, like, there is actually, this doesn't feel like a difference. This starts feeling a little more like delayed disorder world. Then parents come with lots of questions, questions for teachers, for pediatricians, for other parents, for their speech language pathologists. So, these are the most common questions that I get and how I answer them using evidence based practice. And this little cutie pants was a bilingual family that I worked with virtually for a really long time on their graduation day. So just demonstrating that bilingual therapy can be provided in all modalities, in person, online, as long as we have that family support, the stars are the limit. So, question number one is, should I teach my child to be bilingual? Yes, 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 yes. I think that you all can probably explain to me at this point why it's great for bilingualism to be brought into your child's world. And just kind of like hammering that point in from the Linguistic Society of America. They've conducted years and years of research, and they have no evidence suggesting that it's any harder for a kiddo to acquire more than one language as it is for them to acquire one. As long as they're exposed to those two languages throughout their early childhood, they will acquire them. Because again, kids are amazing and their brains are even better. And these two cuties are to emerge friends that blossomed. The little girl's a Spanish speaker and he is not, but they still got thick as thieves and they were like running the clinic. And it's just a great example to show you like they're able to bridge that gap. You don't need to worry about like, well, socially, is my child going to be able to make friends and make those connections? These two guys go way back and it's already been years since they first met. So this is not a unique story. This is just a great case example of that connection being able to be established despite languages being different because kids are great at communicating and problem solving. The other question I get is teaching my child both languages going to cause that speech and language problem? No, it's not going to. So, speech and language deficits occur at the same rate in monolingual kids as they do in bilingual kids. So, if it is a true disorder being identified, it's kind of a tomato tomato. Despite how many languages they have, there's no difference in how many languages a kid has versus how many diagnoses of true language disorder is present. Bilingual kids are going to be delayed whether they have that other language or not, like we mentioned in previous slides. So they're not going to get confused by having more than one language system. They might code switch, and code switch, I think, often is seen as a sign of struggle, of understanding and using language, knowing those grammar concepts. But remember, we want code switching to be considered normal. Code switching is a totally normal and appropriate language learning strategy for especially young kids to begin practicing and flexing those language skills that they're developing over time.
And I think, Megan, just like pointing that out is so, so important because I think for some reason, the concept of code switching, like it gets talked about in adults a lot, it gets talked about in children, but it has this like negative connotation that someone is like struggling to find the right word. And it's like, no, 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 double the things are going through their mind because they have access to more knowledge. And I
Absolutely.
think even pointing that out in someone who may not be bilingual, like I'm from the South. If you hear me around my New York family and you hear me around my Southern family,
It's
I'm code switching.
yeah.
Like we do it even if we don't speak multiple languages. It's truly just the way that we cater our communication to the person in front of us, whether or
Exactly.
not that's in Spanish or English or other language, or just modifying your English in any kind of way to accommodate who's in front of you. So it's so important that you pointed that out because I think it does have such a negative connotation, but it's truly the opposite of anything negative.
Yeah,
Yeah.
being able to successfully code switch is
Yeah.
really a superpower, and especially for with regards to like like dialect and different languages, not so much tone. There are some words in some languages that are like perfect for what I'm trying
Yes.
to say in
Uh-huh.
Spanish, but
Uh-huh.
I have no idea. There's just not an English equivalent. So I'm going to
Right.
code switch because that's the best word to say what I want to say, and I want to be as
Yep.
precise and intentional with what I'm saying as possible. So
Yes.
yeah, sometimes it's a language learning thing in early like language
Mhm.
development. And as an adult, when we think about code switching, we're catering to our audience and we're considering what's the most effective way to get
Yep.
what's here to here.
Yep. Yep. I don't know if there's any Modern Family fans in the room, but Gloria is always a character who people kind of act like she's not as smart or she says the wrong thing. It's usually like a colloquialism that she's saying in English, but she's not a native English speaker. And she has this moment where she says to her family, like, everything that I say out loud, I have to translate in my head first. And then she says, do you guys even know how smart I am in Spanish? And it just sort of like breaks your heart a little bit because it's like people who are taking the time to learn a new language to communicate with other people who speak that language, like they are presenting a different version of themselves that they may not feel is as like adequate, but they're doing it to cater to you.
Yeah.
And that always just stuck with me as like,
No, it's a
imagine
great
having to I mean, we should all think about what we say once or twice before we say it out loud, but imagine having to think about it more than once in terms of, like, acting, like, as a translator in your mind.
Yeah, it's
That
definitely it can be a lot of cognitive load to carry if you're the one that's needing to do, like, double the work than your
yeah,
commu so that's a great thing to bring up because it's definitely a very real consideration, and I think that's why even if you're not bilingual or multilingual yourself, having that open mind and that forever learner mindset about exposing yourself to other languages, cultures, customs, backgrounds, beliefs, it just gives you
mhm,
that better sense of perspective and empathy for other people so you can
mhm,
appreciate beyond that like
exactly.
initial read of like, you don't sound very smart because you're having a tough time with those sentences, like, and
If you
you
have
understand.
ever called, like, a customer service hotline and you have chosen not to use "y'all" on that hotline, you are code switching, and that's exactly why.
So yeah, all that's to say is that more than one language is not going to cause a delay. It's not going to cause confusion. So our next question that we see a lot is, okay, well, all that's great and dandy. How do I do that? How do I teach my kid to be bilingual? And depending on where you live and where you're from, it can be really hard. Like speaking as a parent to a young child in a very English dominant community, it's really hard for me to remember to talk to my son in Spanish. My husband doesn't speak Spanish. I very rarely encounter people in my community that speak Spanish. So I need to be a very active participant in my son's bilingual journey because it's just very important to me culturally and for my family for him to grow up knowing Spanish too, right? So the ways that I often find most success in my clinic, in my home personally, and from what parents have shared with me is that try most you can to speak both languages with your child. So I'll do that a lot with Theo. So if I'm offering him something to eat, I'm like, ¿Qué quieres comer? What do you want to eat? And I immediately pair both of my questions, one language to the next, back to back. That way, he's getting that equal exposure to both languages and he's making those connections that both of these statements mean the same thing. It means food on my plate. So that's going to be one strategy that is a great idea to do is pairing. Another idea is that some families will have one parent that's like, I only speak English to my child, and the other parent or caregiver will speak the non English language. And like when you talk to mom, she's not mom, she's mama. And when you talk to dad, he's just dad, And that specific language system split up is a great way to have that expectation set of like, this is how I communicate and I practice each of these skills in a balanced way as much as possible in the home. And then finally, another really common idea that works really well is that you do the non English language at home. And then in the community, especially if everyone on this call is like from an English speaking community, mostly except for my dad in Miami, you will learn English. You step outside of the door and you will be exposed to English and you will be forced to practice your English because it's the dominant language in the United States. So leave the community to practice that English and learn it, and then keep that native language, that heritage language for home. So personally, that was kind of my experience. Spanish was my first language. And then my older sister went to school. She went to school. English became her dominant language despite being a Spanish speaker first. And then we kind of looked at each other and we're like, you speak English? I speak English. And then we were like, okay, we're speaking English to each other now. And now English is definitely my dominant language, despite all of my efforts to keep Spanish alive and well practiced in my life. So you can be proficient in both. You might be better in one than the other. That dominance can change over time. And when you see that decline in one language, the official term is called language attrition because, again, going back to use it or lose it, you don't use it, you're going to lose it. So my language definitely could use a little practice since moving to Western North Carolina, and I'm doing my best to keep it because I can certainly feel that attrition kicking in. All right, so bottom line, practice, 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 exposure, exposure, exposure. How and when that happens is up to you and your family, what makes the most sense. But at the end of the day, you got to use it or you're going to lose it. So, what are some resources that we can tap into to help support this journey other than just talking with my child or talking to my child in a clinic room, right? So, books is the name of the game. Go to the library. There are so many free books online. Go to your bookstores and seek out those books in your other languages. And literacy research has done so much work on bilingualism as well that a lot of publishers are putting out bilingual books, which is really cool, that incorporate code switching and into the narrative, tone switching, dialects into the narrative. So find something that really aligns with you and your family or you and your clinic and utilize those resources. Books is where the magic happens always, always, always. It targets and supports literally every single corner of communication development. Music is also super fun because music is engaging and motivating. And when there's motivation, that's also where the magic happens. We need to be motivated to learn something and remember it for another time. So if music is really exciting to your child or your client, bring in the music. There's so many really cute bilingual songs and just like straight language songs of non-English languages all over YouTube, free resources at your fingertips. So use it. And again, exposure, exposure, exposure. So if you're feeling tired and you want to take a break, there are definitely 14 million Spanish equivalents of Miss Rachel. Pop that Miss Rachel on your Apple TV, press play, and that will be a great little opportunity to practice that non English language. Same can be said for other shows and movies. You can have just the audio be in that non English language, or if your child is a little bit older and you want to reinforce some like reading skills of another language, you can put closed captioning in another language too. And just that exposure is great practice. And there are, of course, many different language programs that are formally established that are local, like bilingual camps, communication partners that you can pair up with, even like adult, like communication partner opportunities are available. So just do some searches online and you can definitely find a plethora of resources in your local community. So, what should I do if I think my kiddo is delayed? So, first things first, you're going to want to talk to your pediatrician about it and ask for a referral for an evaluation. The name of the game is early intervention, especially if you are perceiving your child to be a late talker. Early intervention is the way. I am very much not an advocate of a wait and see approach. Sometimes it can just resolve if you wait and see, of course. However, if that's not going to just resolve on its own with time and it actually was a true delay, you're just continuing to have more time pass of these behaviors or patterns or habits that need to be undone. So the sooner you get in, the sooner you can nip it in the bud and make real progress in a much faster way and see some real growth in communication and confidence in your child. Once you're in that treatment room with your assigned speech therapist, ask about their experience with bilingual clients and specifically that other non English language. Ideally, they are also bilingual in your languages as well, but if they're not, that's totally okay. They can totally continue to work with you, but there is going to be a partnership that needs to exist in which you are providing support and education about your language history, culture, and customs, because all of that is foundational to success in bilingual therapy. So if you're the therapist, you've got to be asking those extensive questions. And if you're the parent and you're providing information, give as much detail as possible. The more they know and learn about your family, culture, and your like specific customs and what's important to you, the better they're going to be able to write those goals and specifically create a plan that's tailored to your kids. We want to make sure that we're seeing clear communication with how we can kind of bring the work from the therapy room to home in all languages. And if needed, use an interpreter. Oftentimes, interpreters are covered by insurance. So ask that question to your therapist. And if they don't know the answer, then definitely try to look into calling your insurance provider and ask, can interpretation services be covered? So that way, if English is not your first language, and you can more effectively communicate what you want to share with a therapist to support their ability to help your child grow, do that in your native language. That's more important. The primary focus should be supporting your most comfortable language so you can really be an active part of this conversation because you are crucial to the partnership for success in therapy. And finally, we want to understand again, code mixing and silent periods can be normal, but we also want to be sure that we're monitoring progress in all languages. So, what does speech therapy actually look like with a bilingual child? So, in general, there are some considerations. There is definitely a risk of over identification of having a delay or disorder or under identification of having a delay or disorder. And that can come into play for a few reasons. One of them being we're not interpreting the scores appropriately because maybe the therapist doesn't have enough knowledge about bilingualism or that other language or understanding of how to just tweak the test a little bit so it's more appropriate for a bilingual child. There is just a lack of appropriate assessment tools for bilingual kids, point blank, period. Most assessments are like the scores are created based on English speaking kids. If your child is bilingual, that's not quite them. So it doesn't quite reflect them truly, which is a big gap in that assessment world. But there's been a lot of work in this area, and more non-English assessments are becoming widely available and accessible. And all of this new research that's continuing to build up in bilingualism is only going to support the accuracy and efficacy of those test scores to help reduce the risk of over or under identification. So we want to try as much as possible to be sure that all languages are assessed with dynamic tools. So even if you only have an English assessment that you're going to give to your kiddo, try to play with them in that other non-language. Bring in the parent, encourage the parent to come and sit on the floor with you and engage with their child and observe, ask questions, and use those observations to help justify what you think is the best plan of care for your child. Because clinical judgment and observation is just as powerful and just as valid as a standardized assessment. We want to try to avoid bias as much as possible. Everyone has internal bias, even if you are the most educated person in the world. It's just like a fact of human nature. So just be mindful and be aware of those biases and address them appropriately. Use interpreter services, insurance covered most often. That's going to be your gold standard. Avoid using a parent as an interpreter if you can, or like a family or friend as an interpreter if you can, because there can be some unintentional bias there as well in how your message is translated. And of course, always consider cultural and linguistic concepts. So ask those questions and really do your homework as a therapist to be best prepared to work with your kid. So, an example, I conducted an evaluation for a 5-year-old in Russian. I don't speak Russian, but I was able to make it work. I used an interpreter service. I did my research. I found the connections and considerations of the Russian language in comparison to the English languages. And I did my best to adapt what I had, the tools available to me, to best represent what this child was presenting as and what kinds of goals were going to be best for him to succeed. So you can certainly do it. It just definitely takes a little bit more homework from the therapist. So the bottom line is clinical competence. To be able to work with bilingual and multilingual families, you need to be competent in your self-awareness and recognizing your worldview, knowing where your gaps are, building those resources up to close those gaps. Have knowledge of diverse cultures as much as possible. Learn about those customs, beliefs, and communication patterns. They're so varied worldwide. And the more you know, the more you're going to be able to understand what's a difference versus what's a disorder, depending on what family system and languages are most prevalent to your clients, and really tailor your service delivery to that expectation of cultural competence and adapt those assessment tools as much as possible, adapt your therapy techniques as much as possible, incorporate pieces from their customs, their culture, and their beliefs into your session to make it more relevant for them and more unique to them. And the more we're able to do that, the better we're going to be able to see gains and really just establish a very deep and authentic connection with the whole family, which will then, of course, lead to greater success when we consider progress towards goals. We always want to maintain respect for languages and dialect. A dialect is not wrong, it's just different. Another language is not wrong, it's just different. So, keeping that perspective in mind and know that this is all an ongoing process. You always want to be sure that you're giving yourself grace in the event that you maybe do something and then you're like, I shouldn't have done that. I just didn't know. That's okay. Everything is ever evolving in the world with regards to culture and language. I mean, Google wasn't a verb until like 15 years ago. So new words, new cultures, new language systems and dialects are developing every single day. So just understanding that that's the fact and knowing that this is a lifelong learning process is only going to bring you more confidence in the clinic when you're providing support to these kids. So finally, what's the therapy that works? We talked about evals, we talked about treatment, we talked about incorporating parents in the background. What's the therapy that works? So we want to conduct as comprehensive of a language history as possible in the evaluation. We want to think about cumulative information instead of just strictly comparing performance. Like, this is how they perform, this is what the test score says. It's a way bigger picture than that. We got to stay holistic. We got to stay broad, open minded when considering all things when evaluating these kids, and use all of those culturally and linguistically appropriate tools that we just finished talking about. And think about dynamic assessment. Insurance proves dynamic assessment. They like a standard score, of course, because that's easier for them to say, yes, we approve, or no, we deny. However, there is so much research and so much evidence to suggest that dynamic assessment is just as good, that you really got to think about what's best for this child. And if it's not a standardized assessment, it's not a standardized assessment. We're going to go dynamic, and we're going to really think about the big picture. In therapy, you want to think about, as much as possible, providing therapy in both or all languages, not just that like dominant language. So even if a kiddo is dominant in English but has a lot of Spanish at home, or was previously dominant in Spanish, try to do it in both, because remember, a language disorder is present in all languages. So we need to provide therapy in all languages as much as possible. So a bilingual approach is targeting all of those overlapping skills that are across languages, whereas a cross-linguistic approach is a little bit more specific to unique markers to one language and then unique markers to that other language. So you can think about maybe doing both, a bilingual and then a cross-linguistic. It just depends on the kiddo's needs and what their goals are. And overall, the strategies of just supporting that bilingual identity, because bilingualism is a superpower, it's not a disorder. Be patient with language mixing. Remember, code switching is normal, it is expected, also a superpower. Parent participation is going to be so crucial to success here. Creating as much of a language rich environment, not only in the clinic, but providing education and support to families to create that environment at home and in the community, is going to be huge. And encourage parents, don't drop that home language. Even though English is what's happening at school and on the playground, keep that other language present, because it's so important, especially if it's important to their family identity. That is all the evidence I need to continue to encourage that other language to be prevalent with this child's life, and bridge those communication gaps as much as possible. If you feel like you're having a hard time, seek out that interpreter, ask those questions, learn more about that language. I did I did Duolingo for like 6 months before I started working with this family that was Portuguese speaking, and it actually helped a lot. I learned a lot about Portuguese despite never speaking it. So there are things that you can do to better equip yourself. And for the therapists out there, what does ASHA say about this? ASHA is our like American Speech and Language and Hearing Association. And their position is that the service must be delivered in the language that's most appropriate for the client, even if it's not your native language. It's not about us, it's about them, it's about the clients. So use those interpreters. You can refer to other providers. ASHA has an awesome online portal where you can search for providers based on languages spoken. So I've had someone come into my door that was a Japanese dominant client, and Portuguese is similar enough to Spanish that I made that work, but I definitely was not going to know enough about Japanese. So I found a Japanese speaking provider and I referred them there. There's no shame in referring now. If it's not best for you, it's not best for the kids. And we've got to keep that in mind. So our code of ethics prohibits any kind of discrimination based on language or dialect. So we don't want to be keeping kids out of the door just because it makes us uncomfortable. Lean into the discomfort. That's a learning opportunity. Turn that obstacle into an opportunity by doing the work, getting excited about something that's going to change this person's life, by providing them the support and strategies they need to advocate and communicate in a way that's best for them. Try to pick those materials that are most appropriate for them and modify when you can. And if you're doing modifications, or you just really are hitting a wall with some limitations due to that language difference between yourself and your client, just document it. As long as it's documented, it's okay. You're doing the best that you can with the resources that you have, and that's all that matters. So our main takeaways for our webinar today: multilingualism does not cause confusion or delay. Myths harm identification of a true disorder and treatment of them appropriately. And effective therapy is therapy that supports all of a child's languages. So with that, if you have any questions, please let me know. I know that was lots and lots of information, but you're welcome to send it in the chat, jot down my email. I love corresponding with people, so we can even hop on Zoom at a later date and brainstorm, talk about things more. But just super grateful for your time and attention. And yeah, we love bilingualism.
Megan, this was so great. I know you had to speed up there at the end because you had so much good stuff in this webinar. Um, this will be on YouTube next week. I know we also got a request to share the slides. So, Megan, if you're comfortable with that, you can send them my way. And I will send them just to the people who registered on Zoom. So, if you're here right now, you will get them. This was just so great. I actually didn't get to see Megan's slides beforehand. So, the pictures of Theo were a true like joyful
Surprise.
surprise. That just made my morning. So, thank you guys so much for being here. If you are interested in getting started with services at Emerge, that includes speech therapy, OT, physical therapy, reading services, lactation services, sensory based consulting, taskmasters. We have recently added a mealtime support and consulting, parent coaching opportunity. So, we just have a huge range of expertise to offer. If Megan is a perfect example of that. So you can scan this QR code or just visit emergepediatrictherapy.com and go to our initial inquiry. But you'll get connected with a member of our team. And we can't wait to talk to you. So, thank you again, Megan, for all of your work on this really fabulous, robust, informative webinar. And thank you again to our sponsors, Carey Estate Planning and Ashley Brackett. We literally could not do this without you guys and create this opportunity for so many people to learn from so many smart people like Megan. We're so grateful for you, Megan. Thank you so much. And we'll see you at the next one.
Feliz viernes, everyone. Have a great weekend.
Bye.